In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favourite beginner books that I would recommend that you start with if you are new to practicing witchcraft, or you're interested in practicing more witchcraft and you are fairly new to the practice. So I'm going to be sharing some books on different traditions. I'm also going to be sharing some books that are older, which need to be read with a pinch of salt, but that I still think are worth reading, as well as some books that were helpful for me once upon a time. However, I probably wouldn't recommend them now because I think that there are probably better sources. So let's just get right on into it. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you are well and safe and that you are looking after yourselves. It actually feels like ages since I sat down and filmed, and I think it's because I batched filmed a few videos and then I had the Samhain video, and I have been really busy recently, so it's felt very chaotic and very busy. So I'm really pleased to be able to sit down and bring this video to you. This is a video that I have been wanting to make for actually a year or 2 years maybe, and I think I decided I wanted to make it when I made the traditional witchcraft book video. I often feel that when I create videos I want them to be as comprehensive as I can possibly make them. So I decided to go ahead and read so many beginner books that I really did not need to read, because I'd already read quite a lot of beginner books, having started my practice in my teens. When I first came to the craft I was 11, so throughout my teens I read some of the books that were out then, and I can talk a little bit about that. There are definitely some books that I read at that time that I wouldn't necessarily recommend that people read now, and I definitely agree with the idea that as a community we often recommend those same books over and over again that perhaps are a little bit dated, perhaps don't express things, you know, as we would expect them to be expressed in the same way now. And I think some of those texts are really important to read still. However, maybe there are other more modern texts that you can read that will be able to give you that depth of knowledge and information, but perhaps using some language that's a little bit more contemporary in terms of what we expect and accept as well, because some of the ways that things are expressed in some of these older books can come across as being quite problematic in today's perspective, and I personally feel that way. That reading a lot of the older books again and going back and reading older books that I hadn't read before, I feel that I definitely have to take that into consideration with a pinch of salt. And I feel that maybe if someone is actually genuinely a beginner to this, that some may not necessarily already have a strong critical eye in order to discern what perhaps should be taken with a pinch of salt and should not be used in the practice. One area that is often discussed and referenced is the idea of cultural appropriation and appropriating the use of sacred herbs. For instance, white sage used within the close practice of smudging, which oftentimes in real life circles I still hear practitioners refer to their smoke cleansing as smudging. So there's still quite a lot of practitioners I feel that aren't necessarily aware of how the community has shifted the way that they talk about things in order to be more inclusive, in order to be promoting an awareness of cultural appropriation and obviously avoiding it, and to also uplift other voices within our community. So I feel like that's a really important thing to just bring up to start with. I have a lot of books with me, and I guess I did realise that I was never going to be able to make a comprehensive video because I'm never going to read all of the beginner books, and I don't want to, and I think I've kind of put myself at a point where that's not important for me. And you know, because I've always tried to be reading things that are going to be nourishing for my practice. So, you know, over the years I've read a lot about astral projection, I've read a lot about protection magic specifically, and I've read a lot about sex magic. I've read a lot about working with specific deities. I've studied a lot around Hellenistic astrology. I've been looking into deepening my practice in these areas. And I do think at a certain point you have probably read enough beginner books and you can move on to more specialised specific topics, and that's oftentimes the books that I will read. And there are so many incredible books that I have read around a specific topic that I pretty much won't go into here because this is for beginner books specifically. I think the only area that I would touch on within beginner books that I would recommend that is a specific area is protection magic, because I think that is just key. Oh, and energy work as well. So I will talk about books that focus on those for that specific reason, because I feel that they are so basic, they are so core and key to this topic for beginner practitioners. So I am going to talk about some books that I feel are really, really powerful. I'm going to talk about some books that were really, really powerful for me and helpful. However, certain elements in them really need to be taken with a pinch of salt. And then I'm also going to talk about some books that I did enjoy, but again, perhaps I would not recommend them straight away. I would maybe recommend them as text to read because it is written by a certain author, or a text to read because it is incredibly important within the community, but not necessarily something that you want to start with out the gate, because you need to be aware of the areas within it that are problematic or that need to have some context first. So whilst they might be beginner books, they're kind of also not, because what we want is to be understanding things from a more educated perspective. This has been a really, really rambly intro, and I apologise for that, but I will put timestamps so you can skip right to the books if that is what you would like to do. So they're not going to be in categories, but I will explain about each book, like if it's more traditional witchcraft, if it's folk witchcraft, if it is Wiccan based, etc. Oh, I will also recommend some beginner books around the moon, because I think that is something that people come to witchcraft through quite a lot, or they come to Wicca through working with the moon and that sort of more new age teaching of manifesting with the moon. And especially if someone is learning about these things firsthand from social media, because I have some friends, etc., who are not witches, who have been spiritual in the past but have sort of become more spiritual after working on some manifestation rituals with the moon, for instance, and that has sort of been a doorway for them into working in more spiritual witchy ways, although I'm not even sure if they would necessarily refer to themselves as a witch or identify as a witch. So I think that this topic is really, really nuanced. So if at any point I say anything that doesn't align with you, that's absolutely fine. This is just my perspective. This is what I have gleaned from reading all of these beginner books and, you know, comparing, contrasting, understanding content that I'm seeing through all of them. So let's just get right on into it. I think I'm going to start from what is the book that I really would have loved to have had when I was new to this practice. So when I was 11, what is the book that I wish I had picked up? And towards the end I will show you the book that I did pick up first. If you're interested, you can see that. The first book that I think is probably the most powerful and educational book to read is Intuitive Witchcraft by Astrea Taylor. I think this is such a fantastic book because it goes into so much depth. There is so much in this book. It's actually a really, really thick book. It's 306 pages is where the conclusion ends, and then it's a bibliography, and it goes into so much detail, and it is very much listening to your intuition and creating a witchcraft path that is based on your heart and spirit and mind and soul. And for this reason I think this is really, really great for contemporary witches, because it is not coming from a Wiccan perspective. Astrea Taylor is very well known within the community. She writes a blog on Pathos. This is a Llewellyn book, so it's quite a well-known book, and some of you may have already read this book. I think this book is great because there are exercises within each section. It goes into energy work briefly. It talks about listening to your intuition and tapping into it. It talks about manipulating energy. It talks about the types of tools that might be supportive in your journey. There's always further reading suggestions, which are great. It talks about really understanding yourself and knowing when the right time is to act, to cast a spell, which I think is really, really valuable for someone who's new to the practice. It goes into information about the moon. It talks about working beyond the veil, working with deities, as well as working with spirits and the fae and the ancestors, your community, how you can serve your community, being an empath, as well as how to make the everyday magical, which I think is something that we're always discussing on social media. I know that I often feel like that's something that I want to talk about because my life is very busy. I have 2 kids, I have a job, I work from home, and I have my own home that I have to keep nice and look after. I have a husband, and it's just very intense with my children are 7 and 5. There's so much going on at their school all the time. It's just a really busy way to live, and I have courses that I am invested in, that I'm working on. I obviously create content here and create content on Instagram, and there's so much that I want to offer and achieve, and only limited resources in terms of time. So I very much feel like this speaks to that kind of contemporary situation where you don't have a lot of time, you know, you're busy, you have a busy lifestyle, and yet this is absolutely setting the stage for being able to have a really intuitive practice that is your own, and to build confidence in that as well, which I absolutely love. So this is, I think, probably the book that I would have liked to have read first. Because I was so young, I think the book I would have loved the most reading first is either this book, which is Spells for Change by Frankie Castanea. The first reason being that Frankie is a very, very well-known witch on social media, a chaotic witch aunt. It is very, very easy to read. It's very simple and quick, perfect for young witches, but it does actually go into some really important topics that are still shied away from discussing. So about witchcraft being a practice, also about decolonizing your practice, as well as witchcraft and activism, and topics such as shadow work as well, which I think I was already doing that kind of thing when I was younger, but I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know about shadow work until I studied Carl Jung at university. So before I understood about archetypes and before I understood about the shadow, I think that would have been really, really great to have a kind of like vocabulary around what I was doing. So whilst this is, yes, I think quite a basic book, and this is not a book I need, but I just don't really get rid of my books. It does have some great spells in here for binding and for empowering yourself, and yeah, it's a really, really great book to come to if you're quite young. But also I think that every beginner could get something out of this, and if you follow Frankie, I think that you will enjoy this. So yeah, it's not a book that I particularly need. The other book that I think I would have loved to have is this book by Ella Harrison, and this is so beautiful. This is the Book of Spells. It was kindly sent to me by Ella's publishers. Ella reached out to me, and it was really, really lovely to receive this. So thank you so much, Ella. I do love her channel. I've been watching Ella since I think she started her channel. I think that this book is incredibly beautiful because it has beautiful illustrations. It's very, very easy to read. It still goes into some really, really important things to know. Again, definitely it's targeted towards someone who wants something light to read, so someone who's really, really new coming to the practice. But the spells in here are fantastic, I have to say, like really, really great spells, and spells that every witch can utilize. So even if you're not new to witchcraft, this is actually a really useful book, and it's beautiful as well. You can have this out on your altar and find a spell. If you're trying to look for a spell for a certain intention, or if you just want to get inspiration, it's a really, really beautiful book. There's a Better Sex Pillow Pouch, a Lover's Bath, Blessed Garter, Clear Skin Glamour Spell, a Waning Moon Bathing Ritual. I do bath rituals all the time. There's sigils in here, Protection Magic, Empowerment Candle, a Lucky Horseshoe Candle Spell, Walnut Prosperity Spell, and Ella has drawn on quite a lot of folklore to craft some of these spells, as well as actual folk magic charms, which I think is fantastic. This is a way to sort of broaden your practice if you are new, but also if you're already someone who practices and you want some inspiration. This is such a lovely, lovely read. So I'd really highly recommend this, and it's so beautiful as well. Ella did such a fantastic job with this. And another book that I wish I had had is Kellyanne Maddox's Rebel Witch. I read this last year, and oh my goodness, it was fantastic. I love the size of the text, let me just say, like it's so readable, and there are so many fantastic exercises. There's a write it section for everything, so you can journal, and then a try it section as well. So this talks about what it means to be a rebel witch. So Kellyanne is a card slinger, of course. Go and watch Kellyanne Maddox's channel if you haven't. I'm imagining that most of you have. It touches on all the basic things that a beginner book would touch on, but with Kelly's signature language and philosophy, and everything is so radically, fantastically written. There is nothing too prescriptive. It is all about, again, being in tune with what is right for you, creating your own wheel of the year. This goes into all of the things that you would expect in a beginner witchcraft book, and so much more, because Kellyanne, it's the way that she brings her unique language and philosophy to the topics that's so valuable. There's so much fantastic wisdom, knowledge, experience, as well as just this beautiful thread of understanding yourself, knowing yourself, self-love, shadow work. It's all like deeply embedded in there to help you craft your own really intuitive practice again, and it's just done with such style and sass and flair, and it's literally like Kellyanne is with you reading to you. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're reading this, when you read this, you can actually hear her voice. It's really lovely because Kellyanne does use the same colloquial language that she does in her videos, and it's just beautiful. I loved it. I was so thrilled with it. So it's Rebel Witch, carve the craft that's yours alone. Does not seek to tell you what to do. Its aim is to spark inspiration and encourage you to create a truly authentic practice. It reflects your unique experiences, tastes and personalities. Now I will be honest, when I read this I didn't do many of the exercises at all. So it was on my list to go through and to actually take some of these prompts and to use some of them to go deeper into it, because I think that this is actually a really valuable book for people who are both beginners as well as intermediate to advanced practitioners. I think there's something in here for everyone, especially if you are a follower of Kellyanne. I think this is exactly what you should be reading. It's perfect. So 2 books by the same author I think that you really need to read are these 2. This is Protection and Reversal Magic by Jason Miller, and this is The Elements of Spellcrafting by Jason Miller. This one gives you 21 keys to successful spellcrafting. It really goes into all of the nitty gritty, like all the little mistakes that you could make, like the nuanced kind of little mistakes that you're like, oh, should I do it like this or like this? Or, oh, I was told to do it like this, but does it really matter? And obviously it's Jason's perspective, so, you know, you can take certain things with a pinch of salt. But Jason, for me, he's written some of my favorite books. Like, I think he is such a fantastic author because the way he writes is so easy to understand. I wouldn't say it's like an easy read, but it's very, very clearly expressed. It's very succinct, it's straight to the point. His books are usually quite slim, but you want to take your time. You don't want to just finish it in a day because there's so much in them, like so much. He has this amazing ability to take quite complex concepts and to distill them and express them in a way that is so understandable and radically transformative for the reader and every practitioner. I would also say that Jason's work is more ceremonial. I feel that Jason's work definitely would call to sorcerers and magicians primarily. However, I think that all witches can get so much out of this book, as well as probably start with this one, Protection and Reversal Magic. This one is fantastic. This is like my favourite protection book, to be honest with you. I do enjoy Christopher Penczak's Protection Magic book as well, because there are some lovely nuggets of wisdom and experience that Christopher also brings to the topic, and as well as some lovely recipes and such. However, this is probably my favourite because it's just so succinct. It's just got everything you need, really, for effective, powerful personal protection, and I would just recommend this every single time. I have a number of books here that I've read by different authors on protection magic, but this one is definitely my favourite, and then Christopher Penczak's book as well. So Protection Magic, this is what you need. And then spellcrafting, this is fantastic. I would really highly recommend these to beginners as well. Psychic Witch by Matt Oren. I talked about this when I first bought it a few years ago when it first came out. I love this book. This goes into so much, actually. It's a lot about energy work, energy manipulation. It's fantastic for beginners because it breaks it down in a way that's really understandable, but also there are so many exercises in here that literally you could be an advanced practitioner and you'd still learn so much from this book. I recently received Mastering Magic as well through the Witches box, and I'm so excited to delve into that. I absolutely love Matt Oren. I love his generosity within the community. I love the way he talks about psychic work. I love the exercises in here. I was definitely able to enhance my psychic and divination work after reading this, and I think that it's definitely a powerful one to come back to as well. So I think every beginner and advanced and intermediate practitioner should have this and to read it. Honestly, I think it's bestseller for a reason. In my opinion, it's going to go down as like one of the classics that you're going to need to read. So definitely recommend this for beginners. I love this book. This is Power of the Witch by Laurie Cabot, and this is a witch's guide to her craft. This is an old book, but I think it stands up, and I don't think there was much in here that made me twitch. There are so many exercises in this as well, and I believe that Matt Oren was taught by Laurie Cabot at one point, I believe, don't quote me. So there are definitely similarities with their teachings. Yeah, there's some really, really great exercises in here. So it starts talking about magic, what it is, which is great, and the science about it. It talks about the old religion, the goddess, and then the burning times, the craft of the wise, what it means to be a witch. It also talks about magic in the everyday. There are some fantastic spells, candle spells, a money filter, Mirror magic exercise, this was great. I did this quite a lot, this mirror magic. Beauty magic again, healing. So there's so much in here, and then goes on to milestones and future. This is actually not a huge book, but there's so much in here, and I absolutely love this. I love this book. I do love her writing as well, so I would really highly recommend this if you can get a copy of it, although it is an old book. So if there is something in here that you're like, ooh, just be aware of that, and you know, take what resonates and leave the rest. One of my favorites. I have a book to recommend that I don't have the copy of right here, but it is The Altar Within by Juliet Diaz. That is the newest title by this author, I believe. And I really enjoyed this. I was considering reading their first book, I believe it's Witchery. I would like a copy of Plant Witchery as well. However, I think it's being reprinted. There's going to be another reprint of it soon, so it's not currently out yet. I think it might be out soon, or maybe it might be out now. So it is on my list to get that, because I believe that that is going to be a fantastic resource for green magic as well. But The Altar Within is like a love letter to yourself. There is a practice, I think it's like 21 days, where you do different things each day, and that's towards the end of the book, but like it sets up, it's all about giving yourself that kindness, compassion, that love, and it's kind of the book that I think I need to read like every year, to be honest with you. It's like what you need out all the time. It's just something that you need to refer back to, and I thoroughly enjoyed that book. I would highly recommend it. It is not going to teach you the very basics of witchcraft, but it is going to talk to you a lot about what you need to know for yourself in order to give yourself that self-care, and it goes into shadow work as well. It's just a really beautiful book. I would highly recommend. And if you are a true beginner, I think Juliet Diaz is a fantastic author, and even though I've not read it, Witchery, I would imagine that book is very good if you are a beginner. Another book I have not read, but I really do like her writing, is by Gabriella Hurstick. I believe that Gabriella Hurstick's first book is probably a fantastic book to read as well. So those are two books that I have not read, but I pretty much imagine that they would be fantastic books to read if you are new. A newer book that I loved is this by Devon Hunter. This is The Witch's Book of Power. It has a foreword by Christopher Penczak. Devon Hunter is definitely very prolific within the community and is part of the modern witch. Devon Hunter holds third-degree initiations in both the Northern Star tradition of Wicca as well as the Dianic tradition of witchcraft, and the founder of his own tradition, Sacred Fires. Podcast, Modern Witch, currently teaching with the Black Rose School of Witchcraft, and is reigning Master of Ceremonies at the New Orleans Witches Ball. Very active within the community, of course. Within this book, I love that Devon went into his own experiences quite a lot, and he talks a lot about his own work within the community, how he teaches and his tradition and how he learnt. And it's definitely, I think, more ceremonial than some, because he has that background in Wicca, but it's still witchcraft. It's not necessarily ceremonial magic. It's a very empowering kind of book to read, and I think it does go into some slightly more advanced topics. So if you're completely new out the gate, maybe not, but if this is maybe your second book or something, or third book, and you're quite confident, I think that you would enjoy this and get quite a lot out of it. It talks about power, what it means to have power, energy, and throughout there is something that Devon calls the home frequency, and it's like finding the perfect state within you. So there are exercises to tune in to that and to get back to that home frequency, and then throughout you want to be doing that. It talks about the ego, it talks about the lower, higher, middle self, and then different symbols of power as well. It talks about astrology in quite a lot of depth in terms of like empowering yourself through astrology, how to use the breath for power, etc., and then some rituals and invocations to different deities. This is definitely an empowering book. It's baked into it in the title. So on the back it says, ignite the holy fire within to become the witch you were meant to be. So again, it's like calling back your power in a way and really stepping into and owning what it means to be a witch. I really enjoyed this. I think there is a lot in here. I would like to read it again. I read this maybe a year and a half ago now, so it would be nice to go back to it again. Thoroughly would recommend this book. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the moon and working with the moon, beginner books I would recommend are these three. So Moonology by Yasmin Boland, Moon Spells, and Moon Magic by Diane Alquist. And these books I think are very heavily known within the community. I think this is great if you are wanting to learn about the specific signs, like what it means to have a moon in this sign, a moon in this sign, and how you can work with that moon when it comes around to it. There is a little table as well. I refer to it less now that I am more well versed in astrology and studying Hellenistic astrology. However, I do feel like it's a really great beginner book for working with the moon. And I also have heard that the astrology book that Yasmin Boland has written is also very good for beginners as well. Just a really, really great beginner resource to working with the moon, working with the magic of the lunar cycles, exactly what it says. And then these two I think go hand in hand. I've actually confused these two quite a bit. I think that some of the information is repeated. However, this one is printed in black and white and this one has a blue printing, at least in mine anyway. So Moon Magic has kind of got this blue text. There are different exercises and spells within each. This one is more spell heavy than this one, but yeah, definitely this one's maybe more meditation driven. On the back it talks about our ancestors and relying on the heavens to inform and predict many areas. So this is how you are in control of your own journey and navigate it using the moon and what amazing destinations you can reach. So there is a lot about how to harness the power of the moon, the different phases of the moon, what they mean, what to practice when, intention setting, vision boards, moon magic for the everyday, meditations, what it means to have a blue moon, a red moon, eclipses, and then some astrological information as well, so it's getting a bit deeper, and then some recipes as well. So yeah, this is a really, really great beginner book. And then this one, more spell heavy, lots and lots of spells. Again, how to cast a circle in here, correspondences, lots of fantastic spells. Great for beginners. I think they go hand in hand really. You're gonna get value from both if you're new to this. I talked about this in my favorites from last year. I read this book last year, I really loved it. This is A Spell in the Wild by Alice Tarbuck. Not a how-to, but you learn a lot. And it's great for people who are sort of like, oh, witchcraft. Kind of intrigued by that, but a little bit. Also, I don't know really where to start, what I'm getting into. This is kind of a book you can read if you're not even interested in getting into it. You just kind of want to delve into someone else's world for a while, because Alice is a really beautiful writer. It's literally like reading a novel, but it's in the first person, walking through the wheel of the year, actually month by month, with a real witch and exactly what is on their heart, on their mind, what they experience. It talks about witches haunting the footnotes of history, from medieval witches burning at the stake to the lurid glamour of the 1970s witchcraft revival. Witches are back, they're feminist, independent, invested in care for the self and the world. And it's just beautiful. Alice writes so beautifully. So it says, a year and 6 centuries of magic. Emma Mitchell, author of The Wild Remedy, says, these enchanting words make the world feel less broken. I think that's very true. Ellie Williams says, part primer, part chronicle, a fresh and personal account of a contemporary witch's year told with lucidity and verve. From my perspective, you know, there was a lot in here that I knew and understood, and I was like, oh yeah, that happened with me as well. I felt like that when I was that age, or yes, I had that experience too. But also it was just a lovely, healing, kind of reflective read. Really, really yummy book to get into for some self-care, and also definitely getting into some history and folk magic, as well as information about some deities. So there's stuff about the Kaliak in here, stuff about Isabel Gaudi in here, and also about how to forage in areas that are more built up, sort of more city areas. I think it's a lovely, lovely book, definitely for beginners and more advanced folks as well. Witch Body, I love this. This is Sabrina Scott. Sabrina recently brought out a new book, I believe, which I need to get my hands on. I love this. This is like a dissertation in a graphic novel. The illustrations are fantastic and the writing is really academic. So it's not what you expect. Witch Body, a rambling and poetic autoethnography of Western occult magic as a pathway for environmental learning and advocacy. This book is an invitation. It invites you to touch it, feel it, smell it, taste it. It invites night dreams and daydreams, meditations and journeys, contemplation and conversation. Here's a little section. So this is the image. You can see it. Definitely animistic in perspective. Pedagogy should shed light on demarcation, on the positioning of particular bodies as inert or dead and therefore irrelevant, ready for exploitation. Beings who no longer have beating hearts or breath in their lungs may be framed by humans as dead, but to the soil they are very much alive. They fuel that shape-shifting and emerging bodies. Bodies labour in the making of each other. We break each other down and build each other up. We change forms, all of us. Relationships of entanglement shift, as do constitutions. Here and there and gone and reincarnated, recycled, material, felt and sensuous, like the bleep blop of laugh poetry. Nature does not revolve around the human. So this is like a really, really beautiful message, and it's definitely a place to start if you are an animist already. Definitely you don't have to be a witch to read this, but it's also just really highly engaging and enlightening, a really beautiful read, and it just really gets you thinking about actually the nature of your relationship to something. So, you know, this dirt that I've just found, or these bones that I've just found, or this dead butterfly that I've just found, what is my relationship to this? And, you know, how am I serving it as much as it is serving me? It's very much about the idea that, you know, we've just been so conditioned as humans to sort of take from the earth. Specifically, life-changing experience reading this. So I would definitely recommend that everyone interested in witchcraft reads this at some point. There are still so many books. So for traditional witchcraft, I would recommend The Crooked Path by Kelden to start with, and then Traditional Witchcraft by Gemma Gary. This is a Cornish Book of Ways. Both fantastic books. I think this one starts from the very, very beginning. From Kelden's perspective, it really breaks it down. There's some beautiful practices, some beautiful recipes in here. Kelden is a wealth of knowledge and experience. I talked about this, I'm sure, in another video. It's the first book on traditional witchcraft that I read, and I have read quite a few more since, and still loads on my list to read. But I think this is just a fantastic place to start if this is something that is calling to you. And then Traditional Witchcraft by Gemma Gary, a Cornish Book of Ways. I would highly recommend Silent as the Trees by Gemma Gary as well, and there's The Black Toad as well. There is also Folk Witchcraft by Roger J. Horn, which is in here. I just didn't want to get it out because it's like so many books to show you, but Folk Witchcraft, slightly different, but similar as well. It's kind of same but different. So Traditional Witchcraft, this is definitely Cornish practices. I would say this is a mixture of folklore as well as traditional witchcraft. I learned a lot reading this book. I think Gemma Gary is just fantastic, wealth of knowledge. I love the books by Troy Books. I love supporting them as well. I either buy them in Glastonbury at Courtyard Books, or I buy them online, Troy Books website. They are fantastic books. Would highly, highly recommend this. So I'm rambling on some of them, but I really do need to speed up because there's so many. Let's talk about energy work. I think this is a really important book to start with if you are new to working with energy, and if you're new to raising energy, and if you're new to setting intentions and working spells. This is How to Raise and Send Energy for Spells That Work. Now this is a great book. It just breaks it down. I think when you've been practicing for a long, long time, and especially when you've like not recorded the whole time, because there are times in my life when I wasn't recording everything. In my teens I didn't record everything, and I did things on the fly, on a whim. I had a couple of years away from it when I was in my 20s, you know, some mental health things going on, and I do think that, like, you know, I forgot some things. And it's like, also when someone asks you, you're like, literally, where do I start? And so sometimes it's amazing to go back to basics with a book like this. Like, this book breaks it down. You're like, oh yeah, I know that, but thank you for writing this book, because I never could have expressed it in that way. And now, like, I have like a framework for how to actually get something done that you've been doing intuitively. And it's almost like, you know, when you learn something intuitively by doing it, and then you have to go back to the start again and sort of realize, okay, what have I actually been doing? And I think it's good for everyone to do, to be honest with you, because you learn how to drive and it's like automatic pilot. I feel like sometimes I can do things on automatic pilot, and I don't think that's so good for me. Like, I really love being present. Being present all the time is ideal, but like, I mean, if I'm doing witchcraft, I think I have to be present. If I'm actually doing things just like on automatic pilot, how powerful is that actually going to be? And how much more powerful is it going to be if I'm actually aware of what I'm doing? Even if it's like innate and instinctive now, because I've been doing it for so long, and I, you know, was doing it before I knew what it was, just like the shadow work, like I didn't have the language for it or the container for it. That's why I think also learning Reiki, it's like another container for the work that I've been doing for years anyway. It's just, it's got a different name, and it's got different roots, it's got its own tradition, it's got its own ways of working, and having that as a practice that I can also offer others is something really powerful as well, because it just gives you more frames of reference, more containers. For me, I feel like I have all this information, and it's like I need to compartmentalize it and understand it, like where is it all coming from, otherwise my brain feels like it's going to explode. But so often I'm like, I read something, I'm like, yeah, I know that, and I know that, and I know that. It's just I didn't know that I knew it, or I've forgotten I knew it, or I needed to be reminded about it to be fully present and to be like mindful in that moment. And I think like that's a really good book. So if you are new to practicing, or if you are an old timer, if you're a veteran, you're advanced or you're intermediate and you just want a refresher, or you want to go back to basics and be like, actually, let's break this down. Let's be a bit more mindful, let's be a bit more present. This is great as well. And there are exercises in here, beginner meditations, talks about what magic is, what energy is, how to raise power. It does come from a Wiccan perspective, but it's not inherently Wiccan really. I think you can apply this, and I think that they did this on purpose. It's Deborah Lipp, by the way, I don't think I said that. Magical Power for Beginners by Deborah Lipp, it's a Llewellyn. And there's a whole series around this for beginners. This is the only for beginners I've read from Llewellyn, but I would definitely read more because I do think it's great. It's actually a really quite a thick book as well. I think, what, 300 pages worth. There's a lot in here. Very, very wise teacher. Gardnerian witch in 1982, high priestess in 1986. Been teaching ever since. I was born in 1986. She's also appeared on television, and she's written a lot for the Llewellyn Magical Almanac, etc., and the New York Times. Very active in the community, and I think this book is great. I don't think it was published all that long ago, to be honest, so I think it's fairly modern and contemporary, and I would definitely read this again. I would definitely reference this. Brilliant book. Highly recommend. More energy work, Casting Sacred Space. Ivo Dominguez Jr. This man, I swear, is a genius. I think his work is so powerful. He's got so much wisdom. I do sometimes struggle to follow his sentence structures. He's got quite a complex way of writing, and sometimes I need to read things a few times. And I got a first class honours at university and I did a dissertation, so I can understand academic writing, but there's something about this. Look how teeny tiny the writing is. It's teeny tiny. There is so much in this, honestly. I'm not even finished this. This is a book I'm currently reading. And obviously it's talking about very, very basic stuff. There's stuff in here about what a sacred space is. Like, what is a sacred space and what does it mean to have a container for something? So again, it's like going all the way back to basics. So it's perfect for people who've been doing this for a really long time. He's very academic, he's so well read, he's so experienced. Another book I would recommend for people trying to develop their psychic skills is Keys to Perception. That is a fantastic book. He's absolutely fantastic at breaking things down and offering exercises to really push your abilities in certain areas. But again, the language is just slightly, it's complex, so you want to sit with it. I think it's a great book. I think that his writing is good to be digested slowly as well, so read it slowly. There's exercise in here, stuff about symbols. It goes into grounding and centering, really, really basic stuff. But again, I'm not even complete yet. There's information about the elements in here, and he also has another book on elements as well, which I would imagine is very, very good. Again, I haven't read that one yet because I'm working through this one. But yeah, I think from reading Keys to Perception and then having started this, I think Ivo is a fantastic author to be reading if you are interested in energy work, if you're interested in getting a really solid basis in these areas. Fantastic author. There's lots of praise here as well from Karen Harrison, the Herbal Alchemist Handbook, which I have over there. It's a good book. It's actually a really good replacement for Scott Cunningham Herbal as well, if you're interested in something like that. I'm still going through it, but I can imagine I'm going to be pleased with this. On the back it says, Casting Sacred Space teaches the readers the importance of sacred space as a root of all spells and rituals. It covers the basics, including grounding, centering, symbols and timing, several paths and variations of magical teaching. Readers learn to set the stage for their magical work and how to maintain it with protection symbols and meditations. Dominguez also goes beyond the circle method into quartering, energy work, and like many cross-quarter connections, Kabbalah and chakras. This is a useful, accessible handbook for the beginner that even the most advanced practitioner will refer to again and again. This is a book I really thoroughly enjoyed. It's quite an old book now. I read this quite a few years ago now. Witchcrafting, A Spiritual Guide to Magic Making by Phyllis Curott. This is a fantastic book. It goes into like everything. It goes into quantum physics. It goes into what magic is, again, what it means to be a witch. Wiccan High Priestess Phyllis Curott is a lawyer and author of Book of Shadows. So it does come from a Wiccan perspective, but I think it's a great book. And there's a lot in here about working with the moon as well. So if you're new to that, I think it's great. There's information here about drawing down the moon and dealing with negativity, secrets of spellcasting, energy work again, how to work in a coven, how to have a solitary practice. There's information at the back about Sabbats. I have documented quite a few of these pages. I have referred back to it several times. I really enjoyed this and I would highly recommend it as a read. It's quite thick, like 325 pages or so. It's a good one. So Mysteries of the Dark Moon. I love this. Demetra George is amazing. This book, it stands up. There is so much in here, like, oh my gosh. the wisdom. It goes into like the female shadow essentially. It's about the dark goddess and the dark moon, working with the dark moon and the dark goddess. If you have read Of Blood and Bone by Kate Froehler, you would very much get a lot out of this as well. I love that book. I wouldn't say it's a beginner book necessarily, but this, because there's so much in here, it's not the easiest read. It goes into a lot of psychological information, left brain, information about the phases of the moon, the dark phase, the lunar, her story of the feminine, so like matriarchal communities and how we then came to a point where we live in a patriarchal society, the Middle Ages. Then it goes into different deities. So it talks about Medusa, it talks about Hecate, it talks about Lilith. I love that section. I absolutely love this book. I read this quite a while ago and then revisited it. I would stand by this. I am interested in reading Demetra George's more recent Hellenistic astrology books. I believe there's 2 of them. I've heard they're very good. I think Manuela has read the first one, I believe. Oh, Nyx as well, Daughters of the Night. And then there's journal questions as well for each section, so you can really delve deep into this and go into like the shadows of it as well. Really powerful for working with the dark moon and working with the dark goddess. Brilliant book. I have some older books here. I would recommend them, but we need to take them with a pinch of salt. A Witch's Bible by Janet and Stuart Farrar. I really enjoyed this because I've never worked in a coven. I've never been initiated into a coven, and so whilst I was practicing sort of a form of Wicca when I was a teenager, or believed it was Wicca, and that's what I was reading about, it never really aligned all that much. But reading this, I started reading this when I was younger and I never finished it because I found it really overwhelming, it being so big. And so then finished it more recently and found it really, really highly useful, and a lot of it is transferable. There are some parts of the book that made me wince a little bit because, again, like outdated ideas and concepts and language around certain topics such as gender, sexuality, inclusivity, etc. But I think it can be taken with a pinch of salt because I do believe that these authors intended the very best and they intended for inclusivity. But yeah, there is that element to it. I would recommend that it's taken with a pinch of salt, but so highly useful, especially if you're interested in working in a coven or even forming a coven of your own, even if it's not Wiccan based. On the back it says, everything you need to know is here. The Sabbats, casting and banishing the magic circle, complete book of shadows, the Great Rite, initiation rites, consecration rites, spells, witches' tools, witchcraft and sex, running a coven, clairvoyance, astral projection. The astral projection section was very good actually. There's a lot in here as well, just a lot of wisdom. I don't know if you've ever watched any of the documentaries that included Janet and Stuart Farrar from like the 70s, but they were pretty good, and some of them I think are available on YouTube. I think that the way that they talk, they've got a lot of wisdom. I very much enjoyed this. I believe that this was 2 or 3 books. Includes 2 books in one volume, 8 Sabbats for the Witches and the Witches' Way. And the Sabbat section, yeah, is really quite thick. So we'll say there is some nudity in the book, so if that's not something you want, then yeah. And obviously it's a Wiccan book, so if that's also not something you want, then avoid. But I would recommend if you are interested in learning. Hedge Witch by Ray Beth. I love this book. I really, really do. I think the exercises in the second half of the book are gold. So learning to create your own astral space, etc. And Hedge Cross is great for that. The first section is very much like a beginner book. You know, it goes into all the Sabbats. It's structured in quite a different way as letters. So it's almost like reading a book of letters. So to Tessa and Glyn, I believe that Ray Beth acted as a teacher, a mentor for these new witches, and so would write them letters every so often. So each letter would include a new lesson. So this was 1987. Very much goes into all the basics, but from a Wiccan perspective. I will say that again, it's Wiccan, so it's based on Wiccan perspective, so just bear that in mind. If that's not something you want, don't go into it, but I do think, for me, I got the most value out of the second half of the book, so stick with it for that, or just read the second half first. In my head, I believed it was separated out, but I actually don't think it is. But yeah, I think that the second part of the book I personally felt was the most valuable for me, but I think that's probably because I just knew everything that I read from the front, so I was like, yeah, I know that, yeah, I know that. But yeah, I think it's definitely useful if you're not bothered by the Wiccan undertones. The Spiral Dance by Starhawk. This is like a classic. I love this book. Definitely some areas where words would have been chosen differently, I think, now. However, what is great about this edition is it's a special 20th anniversary edition, so a good chunk of the book, page 229, this second half of the book here is 10 years later commentary, and then 20 years later. I think this book is a really great book. Again, Wiccan perspective, goddess religion, and now is part of the reclaiming tradition, which there are some other authors like Jane Meredith within. So it says here, witch, activist, eco-feminist, author of The Pagan Book of Living and Dying and The Fifth Sacred Thing and Truth or Dare. I also have The Circle Round by Starhawk, which I would recommend. That's also written by Anne Hill and Diane Baker, I believe. I would recommend that too. This is just like a course in witchcraft from a feminist perspective, almost like Dianic Wicca, I guess, although it doesn't say that, but goddess worship, Wicca, reclaiming tradition. The rebirth of the ancient religion of the great goddess. You're going to learn about the goddess and you're going to learn a lot about how to actually practice. And there are some great exercises in here for working within a coven, as well as things that you can do on your own, and some lovely meditations as well, working with energy, working with the elements. So it's kind of got a full course baked in. A book I absolutely loved is this, Witchcraft for Tomorrow by Doreen Valiente. I love her writing. I really enjoyed this. There was stuff in here that I learned that I don't think I could have learned from anyone else, and I don't particularly like Gerald Gardner's writing. I've read a few of his books. I wouldn't really recommend them, to be honest with you. I think they're probably quite important to read, but I prefer Doreen Valiente's writing. So this is basically Doreen's answers to all the questions she would get. So talking about ethics, festivals, signs and symbols. Remember there was something in here about ley lines as well. The magic circle, divination, I love that section. The witch's alphabet, witch's attire, the working site, Sabbath's sex magic. There's quite a lot in here and I would highly recommend it. Again, Wiccan, but I think you can read past the Wiccan aspect. In my opinion, you can. Again, if you're not interested, then don't, but I do feel like it was important for me to read some older texts and I really enjoyed this, so I would recommend it with a pinch of salt. So it's getting quite dark here, so I don't know if it looks any different. I've just switched my battery over. So we're getting to the tail end and I'm going to share with you the books that I read that I did get a lot out of, but maybe I wouldn't recommend them necessarily, so we'll just go with those. Let's start with this one. I read this a long time ago. This is Wicca by Scott Cunningham, of course. Very popular book, as are all of his books. I think it's probably important to read, not necessarily the first book you read though. There's some things in here that I find problematic. The way that the first part of the book talked about witchcraft being like a shamanic practice, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with. Shamanism has been defined as the first religion. There are some problematic aspects to this, but I really do like Scott Cunningham actually, and I think that he did so much for witchcraft and the community in Wicca, and I will keep this book as there's a lot in here. Again, all the basic stuff about connecting to the earth, about circle casting, about working with the elements, about different festivals, about the craft of the wise, about altar setup, etc. Dance, energy work, the basics to start a Wiccan practice on your own. And I did actually base quite a lot of what I worked on this. The cat is at the bottom the camera, by the way. Maybe this is something you want to read if you're not put off by the Wicca part. I think it's probably important that people read it eventually, but it's not necessarily the first thing you need to read. This is Green Witchcraft by Anne Mora. I really like this book. It's not what it says. It says folk magic, fairy lore and herbcraft. Yeah, some herbs, but this is basically a Wiccan handbook and I enjoyed it. There's a lot for Sabbats, like if you are in a coven or you want to form a coven, whether Wiccan or not, I still think you get stuff from this. It is basically like a Wiccan handbook, really, I would say. Lots of correspondences again. Anne Mora has several others, which I've not read the others, and I think she has a grimoire as well. I'm currently reading The Mansions of the Moon for the Green Witch, which I'm finding issues with several parts of it already. But I think maybe this is something you might want to read eventually if you're a Green Witch, but it's really not what it says it is, and that's my main issue with it, really. But I think it's a good book for Wiccans, like a Wiccan handbook. It's good. So if that's what you want, go ahead and read that. I'm going to share with you the first books I ever read. The very first book was this. This is Witchin by Fiona Horn, a handbook for teen witches. Again, Wiccan, very basic. Witchcraft, this is the first kind of, wow. Yeah, I devoured this, basically. For years I actually wanted a book like this, but this was the first one I got my hands on. There's letters to Fiona and then Fiona answers them. Real witchcraft, dedications, circle casting, the different quarters, the guardians, tools, natural witchcraft, yeah, problems in school, bully spells and all of this. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I have this as like memories, you know. I read this as well, which was quite popular at the time. This is Witch by Fiona Horn. I don't believe that there's much written in here about Wicca. It's written as witchcraft, but it is Wiccan based. It refers to Starhawk here. There's information at the start about her story again, about being skyclad. Again, lots and lots of correspondences. This was basically my first book into proper witchcraft. Lots of spells again. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it though. I think it was probably one of those ones that was like, it was great for me because it's kind of the beginnings of my practice and it did so much for me, and that's why I have sentimental attachment to it, but I wouldn't recommend it unless of course you are a Wiccan yourself and you want to read something by Fiona Horn. That's probably the only thing I would suggest because it's got the same stuff in it that the other books have, you know, about deities. Oh, this looks nice though. Persephone's Perfection. I've dog-eared this page. These are like beauty spells, cosmetic conjurings, Medusa's makeup remover. Who doesn't need that? But I still wouldn't recommend it. But for me, I loved it. There's some nudity in this as well. But yeah, this is where I started. And there's this as well. This was also one of the first books I read. This is The Real Witches, Book of Spells and Rituals. And there's another one, I'm sure, like a smaller one, which I can't see. I have several books by Kate West. It's like a handbook for modern witches, really, but it is Wiccan based, all of it. And it's in that whole area where witchcraft was synonymous with Wicca, or Wicca was synonymous with witchcraft. There's lots of spells in here though, which are interesting, and there's lots about the Sabbats as well. Again, it's kind of the same stuff. It's just pretty, and it has memories for me, so I'm gonna leave it there. So I probably wouldn't recommend those last few. I just have sentimental attachment to them. I would say for Scott Cunningham, I would recommend the Oils and Brews book, which is over there. Incense, Oils and Brews. And the Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs is behind me. I would recommend those. I do refer to them. However, Juliet Diaz has Plant Witchery, which I've not read, but I do like Juliet Diaz's work, and it's a contemporary piece of work. Also, Blackthorn's Botanical Magic is fantastic, especially for like essential oils. And then Karen Harrison's book back here as well, Herbal Alchemist Handbook, fantastic, especially if you are interested in astrology as well, and you're interested in the way that Culpeper kind of ascribed those planetary correspondences to herbs, if you're interested from that perspective. So if you're a green witch and you don't want to read Scott Cunningham, those are some suggestions for you. So that's just an additional thing. I am still going to read beginner books, and I probably will do another beginner book video at some point, maybe in a few years when I've read a few more beginner books, but they are not going to be at the top of my list. It's probably going to be more like about reviewing books to talk about, because I think it's important that we're, as witches, as practitioners, and especially those who are talking within the community, whether or not you have a huge following. I don't have an enormous following, but there are people listening to me, so I want to be educated, I want to be aware, I want to know what the latest beginner books are saying, I want to know the direction and, you know, how the information is. I think there are, sadly, quite a lot of books out there that are very much basic information that is rehashed and rehashed. I am going to do a video on green witchcraft because I think there are a few books like that that do kind of go over the same thing. It's not to say that the authors don't have the best intentions and they're not wise and experienced, because I'm sure that they are incredibly wise and incredibly experienced. It's more that there is a desire and a need within the consumerist world for this kind of content that is easy to digest, that looks pretty, that delivers the information in a very simplistic way. But if you are really interested in deepening your craft, the books that I've mentioned at the beginning, books like Intuitive Witchcraft, books like The Witches, Book of Power, books like The Elements of Spellcrafting, books like Witchbody, Mysteries of the Dark Moon, although that's an older book, I think it stands up. I think it's really important text. It does depend what you want. If you want to practice traditional witchcraft, I've given you a couple of basic traditional witchcraft books, but there are then ones that you will want to move on to. So, you know, it's very much like follow your own path, follow your intuition, literally follow your intuition when it comes to what books to read for you, for your practice. You know, that's what I've been doing. And, you know, for instance, I followed my intuition with Lee Morgan's A Deed Without a Name, and it was one of the best books I've ever read. It's fantastic. One of the best books I've ever read on folk witchcraft is Lee Morgan. The Wicked Shall Decay as well, another incredible book. But I'm going on and on and on. But you want to just follow your nose, follow your intuition, read what works for you, leave the rest. If you are put off by the Wiccan stuff, don't touch the ones that I've mentioned, have Wiccan influences. If you're not put off by that and you're interested, then go ahead. Things like Psychic Witch, incredible book, Evo's book, these are all great books. The ones that I've suggested. I know this is a really, really long video, but hopefully the timestamps will help. I hope that this has been comprehensive enough. I hope that it's given you enough to chew on. Some places that you can go if you are not even a beginner but you haven't read some of these books and you're like intrigued by them and you want to develop a bit more, because some of the books I mentioned are very, very beginner, and there's like a spectrum, right? And some of them, like the Witch's Book of Power or Elements of Spellcrafting, are a little bit further along. So, you know, you go with what's right for you, pick what's right for you. Let me know how it goes. Let me know if you've read any of these books, how you felt about them, what you took away from them. If you agree with me, if you don't, absolutely fine, whichever. I'd love to hear what you're reading. If you've got any beginner witchcraft books that you want to recommend as well that I've not mentioned here, you want to put down in the comments box for other people to see as well, that would be great, and why you like them, why you think that they're valuable. I really, really hope this has been nourishing and helpful and supportive for you. This is what I aimed for, and I really hope that I've been able to deliver. So let me know what you think in the comments box below. As I said before, give the video a like, share it with anyone who you think it would help support at this time. Also subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and click the little notification bell to get notified when I create and upload videos just like this. I have a Patreon page if you are interested in supporting me. There I create new and full moon full forecasts, which include the planetary positions and aspects, like what they're doing in the skies, how that's going to be influencing you, how you can work with those energies to either mitigate or work with any beneficial energies, as well as some journaling prompts for shadow work, ritual and practice suggestions, herbs and crystals to work with, and a custom tarot spread for that lunation as well. I work really, really hard on these because I have now been studying astrology and Hellenistic astrology specifically for quite a while now. I feel like I'm really getting into a groove with it. It's been teaching me as I've gone, and it's a very intuitive process. I put a lot of effort into it, and I think that from what I've heard, it's been of value. So if you're interested in that, do click over to Patreon. I also upload spoke-made Book of Shadows pages. Those are digital Book of Shadow pages that are primarily for recipes and spells that have been featured on the channel, some of them. I am looking to create further tiers as well, which will include other videos and such, but at this time I'm just so up against it, so that's not something I've been able to expand upon yet. But there is that one tier. It would mean so much to me if you would come over and join us there. If you'd like to buy me a coffee, I have a buy me a coffee page, as well as a direct PayPal link, and there's also a super thanks down below if you'd like to thank me for this video, for the suggestions. If you got this far to the end of the video, I'd love it if you could leave me a little book emoji and let me know which book you think sounds like your favorite book, or which book is your favorite. Let me know. Thank you again so much for being here. I hope that you stay well and safe, look after yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you in another video really soon. Many blessings. Mwah.